Learning Curves and Coffee, where we skip the perfection, spill the real, and talk parenting, teaching, and personal growth over a hot cup. I'm Ivory, a mother, edupreneur, and your caffeinated co-pilot through the meltdowns, meetings, and magical moments. Let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are listening. I want to jump in this morning because I've been thinking a lot about this as life has been lifing for me and my parenthood journey in the past couple of weeks. Um, I don't know. I think Khalil may be going through a bit of a growth spurt. I mean, he definitely is going through a growth spurt. He is about to be 9 and he is, craving independence. He's an active little person. And so, obviously, that comes with its ebbs and flows. And so, this journey has been one that is not for the weak, right? Which is why, obviously, I do this work. But I did want to jump in and talk about how when your child's diagnosis changes you as a person, right? I think about that a lot as it relates to myself. No one tells you that when your child gets a diagnosis, you start your own journey of becoming. It's a version of grief people don't talk about. Not grieving your child, but grieving the picture you built in your mind of what their path would look like. I've mentioned this before. I say it aloud and transparently because it is a real thing that oftentimes parents feel guilty about expressing. But it is a human emotion that it's important for us to acknowledge in order to transcend it, right? And it's also important to know that grief isn't linear, it moves in cycles. There's shock, there's denial, there's sadness, there's guilt. Of course, there's acceptance, which I talk about a lot. And there's even some peace that can come with this, believe it or not. And sometimes you circle back again to those same emotions because this is a journey, not a destination. But with each lap, you gain more clarity, compassion, and strength. You really do. And sometimes you take 3 steps back, but then you take 5 steps forward. I talk about this in my Transformative Parent Playbook that this diagnosis that we got for Khalil and his autism, it reshaped the story that I was writing for myself and my family. But it also revealed the depth of love that you have for your child and what you are capable of. Like the things in the past 4 years that have stretched me out of my capacity, emotional capacity, my emotional depth, and out of the identity that I had formed for myself prior to my son's diagnosis. Like I'm a different person than I was then, right? Still some core things that remain a part of who we are, but in general, you know, I see the world through a different lens. And so when Khalil was first diagnosed, I thought grief meant something was wrong with me, that like I shouldn't feel sad about Khalil's diagnosis. So I would tell myself, like, he's fine, we're fine, everything is gonna be okay. But then came the grief, wondering if I miss any signs. Of course, we go through all of that. We backtrack, but before we even gave birth, but during our pregnancy, we think about the things that we may have missed. And then after, during the developmental process, right? And as someone who was an educator, I was also thinking, like, I've taught kids over all of these years, like, what could I have done differently for my own child? And the sadness of realizing the world might not see him the way I do was probably the biggest emotional burden. And then, of course, the anger of watching systems move very slow. Systems, healthcare systems, educational systems, have limited to no resources, access to resources for families, especially families who are not financially well off or have financial stability. What happens to those children? What happens to those families? And then the microaggressions began. I would hear things from practitioners, therapists, like, most boys are active. Maybe he'll grow out of it. Or most boys don't talk at a certain age. So maybe, it'll get better over time. I even was told, I've mentioned to you all before, that his first speech therapist, when he was 2 years old, told me that I was not disciplining him enough. And while I am the first to say that parenting is incredibly nuanced, and there were some things that we all could consistently improve on, there should never be a world in which a practitioner critiques a parent or denies what a parent is seeing, right? So, with that being said, as you would imagine, these experiences, it shaped me, it shifted me, it changed me. Each one was a reminder that I had to fight, unfortunately, for credibility for my child to even get care, which is why, I sold my home in Chicago, packed up everything, and moved back to my hometown where I felt like resources were, or not even a feeling, but a fact, because I did the research. Resources were more readily available, and the school system that I sought out for my child was able to give him what he needed. And so, having to take those insurmountable risks, which I am not recommending that every parent should do. What I am saying is that when you are confronted with a life-changing diagnosis, your life also has to change, and you will make decisions that you never thought that you would need to make. And that fundamentally changes you. I want to talk a little bit more about the systems that we work in. And so once you enter the education maze, because as an educator, and then as a parent, it is certainly a maze, you realize that you need a second language. Educators use a bunch of acronyms, and they fly out like confetti, and people are like, wait, what? What are you saying? What does that mean? I don't know. And oftentimes parents don't feel comfortable or confident to ask, what does this mean? So when a school says he's not showing readiness for general ed placement, oftentimes, if you're not in the school system as a parent, what you hear is that your child is doing something wrong, is something is fundamentally wrong with your child. So we're going to keep him here. But in reality, what is actually being said is that we have not or do not know how to accommodate your child yet. Or we need more resources to support his learning differences, or we need to find resources and support to enhance his learning strengths. But if you don't hear that and you hear a different language, you think a different thing. So how do we become knowledgeable enough and powerful enough to push back on the rhetoric that what our child is not doing, and instead look at what can be possible for them and advocate for that? And so in learning to do that, you have to be vulnerable enough to ask, well, what do you mean by that? Tell me more. I don't know what that means. Can you slow down, so that they can break it down for you? And when they break it down to the core, you will actually learn that it is a systemic issue, not a problem with your child. But again, this journey fundamentally changes you as a parent. You don't just go along with the system and the flow. You are out now actually challenging a system, and that is frightening. And you have to put your big person clothes on to do it. And once you do it, your confidence grows. So instead of shrinking, start asking, what does support look like for my child in order for them to be successful? That's what you ask yourself, and that's what you ask the educators in your in your child's life. And how can the systems adapt to the environment instead of ensuring, or how can we adapt to the environment instead of looking at the child as the fundamental problem? When you shift from looking at the systems and the environment as opposed to the child, you gain a little bit of your power back. It's not an expectation for you to be fluent in speaking as if you are an educator. How could you? These are people who have worked in this field for years and have been trained in this field, and you have not. And so it is natural for you not to know. But what's important is for you to stand on business, as they say, when it relates to your child. So fluency isn't the expectation. Translating that intimidating information into something you can understand is the expectation. How do you do that? By asking, what do you mean by that? So I want to frame this into, as we step back and think about how the diagnosis changes you, I want to step back and frame this and look at this from the discovery, acceptance, and embracing framework. And so, of course, the discovery is foggy, but you do notice patterns and sensory triggers and social struggles and unique strengths. And so that discovery is clarity wrapped in confusion, which is a thing, and that's ongoing. There are moments of clarity and there are moments of confusion, but along the way, you are discovering bit by bit how does the best support your child. And then, of course, the acceptance phase. Once you have felt some level of comfort on how you're going to support your child, and essentially you've kind of taken the reins on this horse and buggy, if you will, you realize the grief cycle doesn't end, it evolves. You accept the advocacy and rest must coexist. And so acceptance is not like, okay, my child is getting better, so I don't have to worry. No, it is, this is my child. Some things have gotten easier because I've learned. Some things are confusing because there's a new behavior, but this is our lives, and we coexist between acceptance and advocacy. And then lastly, the embracing piece. This is where peace lives. You're building routines. The routines are working. Relationships are also accepting and embracing of you and your child's lifestyle. And you have a routine and rituals that surround your child's brilliance, not their areas of growth. So accepting doesn't mean the sadness disappear. I want to be very clear about that. It just stops driving the car. It stops driving your behaviors. You still feel it sometimes, but you also feel gratitude and you also feel pride and you also feel purposeful, right? And those are also emotions that fuel and drive how you move. So I mentioned this in my playbook as well, that grief and growth shape the same space. One softens you, the other strengthens you. This is how you change. This is how you evolve. So yes, diagnosis changes you, but it can change you in one or two directions. You remain in a place of grief and depression, or you arise to a place of grief and growth. Notes, I did not remove them. I did not remove grief because it is a part of the journey and a part of life. So, you all know that I never like to leave any of these spaces without giving some practical tools that I hope that will help you all as we continue to embark on this journey of raising our beautifully brilliant, vibrant, eccentric children. So, here are some ways to reclaim yourself and evolve into the better version of yourself, because that is possible as a parent of a neurodiverse child. Number one, name your feelings without judgment. So you can say, I'm grieving right now. Name it. Name it. Give Naming the pain gives it direction, right? Translate the jargon. Remember, we talked about those microaggressions and those school systems and those healthcare systems that speak to us in ways that we don't always understand. Number one, never be afraid to ask, what do you mean by that? Number two, build your own personal glossary of school terms and study them. Find a mentor, someone who has gone through the journey and of someone you know who it works in the system to be able to break those things down for you. Hello, I'm right here, Ivory. Clarity builds confidence, so never be afraid to ask. Document the journey. I say this all the time, but it is incredibly a powerful tool. Journal the wins and your worries. Proof of how far you've come. This is incredibly powerful for one or two reasons. Number two, you can always go back and read that and pat yourself on the back, give yourself a big hug for continuing to put one foot in front of the other. But second, documenting your journey gives it a story, and all of our stories matter. And that story can be shared with the next parent who is in your shoes. Remember, this is at this point where 1 in 33 probably the gap is probably shortening as it relates to children who are diagnosed with autism in the United States. Number four, I'm not going to change it. I'm always going to include this. Connect with parents who like you, who look like you, and share your lived experience. That is incredibly essential. And then lastly, take breaks. You're not just your child's advocate, and you certainly are not just a parent. You are a human being first, and then you have some other identities in there that includes being a parent. So take a break and do the things that also fuel you outside of your parenting, because you're not just your child's advocate. You are also an example for them of balance and being a full human being. Always remember that advocacy is a marathon of making meaning of all of this. Rest isn't quitting, it is refueling, honey. Take a break. Also, you'll burn out, and no one is ever good or productive when they are tired. So, I'm going to end on this. The reason why I started the Parent First coaching platform is not because, I thought I had it all figured out and I was in a position to be able to solve other folks' problems. No, I am still figuring it out. But I have been able to find meaning in this, and I want to be able to help other parents do that as well. And so we help parents navigate both the emotional and systemic side of the diagnosis, right? Because both of those things play a huge part. And so we unpack grief, we decode school systems. As a former assistant principal, I can help you with that. And we rebuild your identity, which is essential on this journey. And so if you are interested in Parent First coaching, click the link below, schedule a consultation. And always remember, when your child's diagnosis changes you, it's not the end, it's the evolution. You grow new empathy, new language, new fire. You begin to see the world not as it was handed to you, but as it could be for your child. I'm going to close with the reflection that I actually wrote in the parent playbook, which I also link below. Every parent who chooses understanding over shame becomes the change their child will one day inherit. Every parent who chooses understanding over shame becomes the change their child will one day inherit. So until next time, keep your coffee strong, your heart open, and as always, take care of yourself. You're doing better than you think. Bye. This is Learning Curves and Coffee